Welcome to On the Way Classroom with Tony Crisp. Each weekday, Monday through Friday, Dr. Crisp will teach the Bible from its historical, geographical, linguistic, and cultural context. Tune in daily to start your day right and to deepen your understanding of how to better walk the way and enjoy the journey. Now, here's your host, Dr. Tony Crisp.
Welcome to On the Way Classroom. Today we are going to take another step on the journey through the Old Testament. Now already we have learned a lot about how the Bible divides itself according to the Septuagint categorization of the Old Testament. Remember, our English Bibles are in line with the order of books that were laid out 270 years before the time of Jesus. And as we go into dividing the Old Testament, we have already gone through the 10 time periods, the way that I've divided that for you. And then we've gone back through and dated those. We've talked about in the previous two sessions, the primeval period and the patriarchal period, and why I had named them as I did based upon the material and the content. And so now we're going to take just a step more as we come to the period of the Exodus. Now let me share with you just parenthetically why we have a dating system BC AD, or in common language of today in the culture of our classrooms, which are anti-God, anti-Christ, and want nothing to do with religious language, while we have BCE and CE. When I first started studying the time periods of the Bible, everything was BC and AD. And as a matter of fact, all of the literature that was associated, whether it was classified liberal or conservative, primarily archaeology dated everything that way. But then we came to the point of total sophistication in our minds, and we changed any connotation that had to do with Jesus. When I was in school, BC and AD were used, and the BC, of course, stands for before Christ. AD doesn't mean after death, which I used to hear people say, which is hilarious because if you think about it, that would be a period of over 30 years that would be nothing and couldn't be dated. So you have BC, before Christ, and AD is a Latin term, anno, which is the word for year, and domino or domino, which is the word for Lord, the year of our Lord. And that means the time of his birth. So you have the time before Christ, BC, before he was born, and AD, which is the year of his birth. And so now we have an evolution or devolution that has taken place. That is, we have devolved, not evolved, in the sense of dating and the nomenclature that's used for that. Now think about it. It went gradually, and this is always the way it goes. Rarely do you have anyone who wants to bring something in quietly or to deceive people. It's gradual, it's incremental. And so we didn't go immediately to the language I'm about to tell you, but there was an intermediate step. When I was studying, as I said earlier, in school in the 70s, especially the mid to early 70s, then you would have BC and AD, which is before Christ and year of our Lord. It went to BCE, before the Christian era, and then CE, the Christian era. And so we went from actually Christ to Christian, and then it went to common. And so BCE today and CE today doesn't mean before Christian era or Christian era, that is from the time of Christ. Now it is before common era and common era. And if that had just happened all at once, no one would have liked that because it would have been too big of a jump. But because we gradually and incrementally accept things, then that's the way that it is. So when I talk about dating, I still use the older terminology, BC and AD, because that is more true to the fact of how we in the West divide time. We have, since the Christian era, since the time of Christ, it has been dated, and Christians date everything from the time of Messiah's coming in Bethlehem until he comes again. And so that's just a note on dating. So back now to the dating of the Old Testament and the division of the time period. So we have the number one time period from Genesis 1 through 11. That is the young age, the primeval period. And then we have the patriarchal period. And I explained to you why I call it the patriarchal period, because not only was it a time of the father leaders, many would say that much of the Middle East is a patriarchal society to this day. However, everything changed among the Jews after the time of the Exodus. And at that time, the tribes of Israel became a national entity. Before, they were a family that grew into a large nation while in Egyptian bondage. And you know the story of Joseph and so forth. We'll go into that another time as well. But remember, I'm just giving you a bird's eye view now. I'm giving you a view of the general time periods. And so when Moses took the people to Mount Sinai under God's direction, everything started new. It was the founding of the nation of Israel, the Torah, and specifically the commandments and all that was laid down from a moral standpoint, from a judiciary standpoint, from a ceremonial standpoint. The nation of Israel was born, and it will last throughout eternity. That's what God says, and I believe every word that God says. And so we come to the period of the 1400s that we call the period of the Exodus. Now, the period of the Exodus covers everything that is recorded in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Now, all of these names come from the Septuagint translation, the Greek translation. They are Greek words. Genesis is the word for origins or beginnings. Exodus is the word for the way out. Ek is a preposition in the Greek language. Hodos, that O-D-U-S or O-D-O-S in Greek, has a rough breather on it. That's an H sound. So odos, that ek odos becomes ek hodos. Hodos is the word for road or way or path. So you put ek and hodos together, you get Exodus. The word Exodus is a Greek word. It's not an English word. It's like Genesis. That's a Greek word. That's not an English word in its origin. And so Exodus is the way out. So what is the content of Genesis? Well, it's the book of origins. What is the content of the Exodus? It tells us about the Exodus, the way out, the way that God brought the people out. He's not just talking about the path that they took, but the way, the manner in which God brought them out with a strong and mighty arm. Because this was a time to remember. It was during this time that the nation of Israel was given a ceremony that would never, ever be forgotten. And it's called the Passover, Pesach. It is a time that every year is commemorated when the people of the nation of Israel remember how God brought them out. Not just the way, the path that he brought them out, but the way that he brought them out. Everything was done in a certain way so that the people would never, ever forget that they were once in a land of bondage, a land that was hostile to them, and that God had promised his people, he had promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that one day they would own and would have possession of the land that they walked on, and that they would be a great nation. That was part of the Abrahamic covenant that God made with Father Abraham, and the Exodus was his steps in bringing that to pass. And so the Exodus, the book itself, Leviticus, that has to do with all of the ceremonies and the duties of the Levites and the tribe of Levi or Levi, how they were to conduct themselves, how they were to act, what were all the ceremonies and the special days. All of that is in the book of Leviticus. And then the book of Numbers, in Greek, it is the word arithmoi. Does that sound like anything that you have ever heard in English? Arithmetic. That's right. It's having to do with numbers. And so that's the book. And it has to do with the time in the desert. As a matter of fact, that is the term in the Hebrew, the days of wandering. And so that is exactly what Numbers is all about. And it talks about the wanderings of the period of the Exodus. It was a period of wandering for 40 years, and all of that is in the book of Numbers. And then you have another Greek name, Deuteronomy. That's not an English word. That is a Greek word. It's a compound word. Deutero is the number for second, not two, but second. And then nomos is the Greek word for law. The second law would be the way that we would translate it, but that doesn't really do it justice, because God didn't give the law a second time, nor did he give a second law. But what Moses did is went over it. It was the second giving of the law in the sense of the rehearsal. Why is Deuteronomy so important? It's because it is the summary of the time from the coming out of Egyptian bondage till the time that they were in the plains of Moab, across from Jericho. And they were there headquartered in an acacia grove. And at least 2 million people were on those plains ready to cross over into the promised land. 2.5 tribes had already been given the land. And so Moses had been told by God, your days are ended and you're not going to lead the people in, but Joshua's going to. And so Moses gathered the people together and he rehearsed the law with them. And that is called Deuteronomos or Deuteronomy. And that is why if you want to study about the Exodus and you want to get really a bird's eye view and a summary of it, then you go to the book of Deuteronomy. Out of the Torah, Deuteronomy was the book that was most quoted by Jesus. And so that gives you an idea of its importance. And I pray that you'll come back again for the next session as we get into the period of conquest.
Thanks for listening to On the Way Classroom with Dr. Tony Crisp. Tune in each weekday for more information on how to read, study, and understand the Bible. If you have questions, please write to questions@tonycrisp.org. That's questions@tonycrisp.org. Questions@tonycrisp.org. Thanks for listening and have a blessed day on the way.